Welcome to the Oh So Spurs podcast, where today we have with us Jonny. How are you, mate?
I'm brilliant, Jim. Good to see you. How are you?
Good to see you. Yeah, I'm doing very well, thanks. We've got Stu. How are you?
All good. Good to see you all again.
And we've got Deej. How are you, mate?
Doing well.
Excellent. We're going to dedicate this episode to one of our loyal listeners, JellyBean. So I hope you're doing well over there, mate. And we will see you in the comments section on YouTube, I'm sure. We've got a lot to talk about today and lots of positive news as well. It looks like Spurs have been trying to get ahead of the curve before the transfer window has even opened, which is very refreshing. Although I would say this is the second transfer window in a row, or third if you include the January, that we've kind of acted quite swiftly to get things done, which is great. Shall we start with Vicario? Goalkeeper was probably the most important position to fill, just ahead of a centre-back this season. And we've signed someone who is highly rated by one group of fans, as always, on Twitter at about 50%. And the other half say he's a cheap option that can't catch a ball. So, Stu, what's your knowledge of Vicario as someone who's followed Serie A quite closely?
So he's obviously very well thought of in Italy. He's had a really good past 2 seasons and is probably one of the main reasons that Empoli, which is one of those yo-yo clubs that goes up and down between Serie A and Serie B, the fact that they've managed to stay up 2 years in a row, which is remarkable, and that they weren't fighting relegation either. And I was saying before that he conceded 70 goals last year, which would be a red flag, I think, for most people when you hear something like that. But despite conceding 70 goals, he actually had the second highest rating of all goalkeepers that had played more than one game last season. So that gives you an idea of how important he was to his team. And obviously the 70 goals weren't, due to him. And then this season, he was the number 1 ranked goalkeeper, statistically speaking. So when you've got keepers like Onana and Mike Maignan, although obviously he missed half the season due to injury, when you've got keepers of that kind of caliber in the league and he's up there with them, I think that's telling you that we're getting a very, very good goalkeeper. At least he's got a lot of good prospects. The one thing I would say is he does punch the ball a bit too much for my liking, which I think in the Premier League could be a bit of a more of an issue than the Serie A, with the amount of crosses and the amount of high balls that are up there, which you can just see it being a couple of difficult first games, which would then get the fans on his back, which then could create a problem for his confidence. So hopefully that kind of gets drilled out of him before he starts. But the fact that he's an Italian squad after only 2 seasons in the Serie A tells you a lot. And the only reason he's probably not starting is because there's Donnarumma ahead of him, and Donnarumma obviously is a very, very good goalkeeper, so it's not someone that he's going to easily displace. So I think we've done well, and especially for the price tag, half the price of Raya. I mean, it's fantastic. I know a lot of people have been saying Levy's just doing the usual cheap option rather than buying quality. We should get Premier League proven, all that kind of crap. But where did Ederson come from? Where did Alisson come from? You don't have to have played in the Premier League. You just actually have to be a good goalkeeper. And I think we've actually brought in a good goalkeeper.
Very good. Well, I'm hoping your confidence shines through into him, because it would make such a difference to get this right. And we've seen with clubs like Chelsea how hard it is to get this right. I thought Mendy and Kepa were relatively safe players to sign for them, and they proved to not be, as they're off to Saudi Arabia. So you don't have any fears then, Stu, about his inability to catch and overly punch? You don't see that as a major issue?
I think it's something that he's going to have to be taught. But I'm showing my age, but when I was a kid, I grew up with a great Dutch keeper called Hans van Breukelen. And he used to punch before he moved to the UK and played for Nottingham Forest, where Brian Clough drilled that out of him, and he became a catcher of the ball. And when he came back to Holland for PSV, he carried on catching the ball. And I'm hoping that Vicario has the same thing drilled into him when he comes to our shores.
Great. And Deej and Jonny, do you have any comments to add on him from your research?
I think that being a goalkeeper is kind of the hardest position to really have a nailed on talent, which is I guess why Raya's price tag is as high as it is, even if he had a couple years on his contract, I'm not even sure he's worth that much, even with like 2-3 years left on his deal. But
he only had one.
what'd you say?
He only had 1 year left.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I don't. But he's a very good goalkeeper. But I mean, he's not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. But from what I've seen of Vicario, I am intrigued. I am encouraged, and I don't know. I think that it's the type of signing that I want us to be making, especially because we have so many areas we need to improve. We can't. I definitely don't think we should be breaking the big bank on a goalkeeper that would cost more than Courtois did when he went to Madrid.
No, agree. And as Brighton show repeatedly, you don't need to spend massive money. You just need to have a good recruitment network and do it correctly. And if you believe what you read, and that's completely up to you, we seem to have taken a more data-focused approach, and there's 3 or 4 people on a kind of transfer committee at the moment, including our head scout, and Pratashi's apparently in a consultancy role still with the club. I'm not sure if that's a good thing or bad thing. And he was actually a goalkeeper that Pratashi really liked last season, is what I was reading as well. And according to, reputable people like Alistair Gold, this goalkeeper was very much a favourite on his list to keep an eye on as well. And after a second good season, it was deemed it wasn't just luck that he had turned the corner. 2 really good seasons in Serie A indicated that he was ready for a step up, which goes with his age, right? 26 is kind of like being 21 as an outfield player. You're hitting that kind of more maturity, and you're kind of coming along with your development quite rapidly at that point. So
it's quite funny that our fan base has been critical of our scouting, and now they're going apeshit because we've actually used scouting properly to bring in a player before he becomes a huge, expensive player.
I mean, Brighton just is about to sign a keeper from the Belgian league, if I remember correctly. Why did they just sign Raya if he's such a sure bet? I saw that on. I don't know. I feel like everyone wants to be Brighton until you make Brighton signings. So this is coded as a Brighton signing to me. So I'm happy about that.
It's interesting to see how who's going to spend 40 million on Raya now as well. Yeah. When you look at United or the other big club that's looking for a new keeper, Brentford did not have a very strong negotiating position now that Spurs are out of the picture. And going back to Vicario, I mean, again, my knowledge literally extends to a 9-minute YouTube compilation from last season, but it does show a lot of saves, albeit many of them from several camera angles. But what I really liked about what I saw there was just his reflexes are incredible, and he's so agile. He's like, fairly standard size for keeper, 6'2", but he's able to get down low really quickly and change directions really quickly. And I just thought he just seems to be. He's like a decent Gomez kind of thing. He's like very acrobatic, and I don't know. I really liked. You just sort of think when you see those videos, you don't see all the crap, and I assume that given what Stu's been saying about his performances for Empoli, that he's not been a liability for his team, which is obviously what what's been the big concern for Spurs. When you think of the North London derby, I mean, like, we didn't need to give any help to Arsenal, but like Hugo just gave them a free goal after like 15 minutes or something, with absolute shocking play at the near post. And that's the sort of thing. Just, I suppose the questions I would have in terms of how he fits into Ange's system, and obviously Ange must think that he can, but that ability to play with your feet, which clearly Hugo hasn't had at all. Yeah. I've read that he isn't a player who doesn't keeper who hits the ball long very often, which obviously that's you don't need that for Ange's system. Just the ability that he has. I've seen older information about his passing skills and his sweeping ability that a couple of years ago wasn't as strong, but I don't know if that's something that this year has been better. And also just wondering about the physicality, because like you're saying, in the Premier League, I know that Italian football is quite a physical game, but I think the pace of it, and you think of some of the lads who are the Haalands of who be up there, a real strong presence, or the Lewis Dunks, these guys, you need to impose yourself as a keeper as well. So that's something I would be interested in. I don't know if Stu's got any insight into
He's
those
he's
angles.
actually 6'4".
Oh, is he?
So he's actually quite a big bloke. So I don't think he's going to struggle for the physical aspect.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
and I read
the feet are good. Sorry,
Feet are,
Jim.
are so. I mean, he's not Ederson type, but he's not awful. He's not Lloris. I mean, no one
Is he
is.
right or
Thankfully.
left-footed?
To be honest, I don't know.
Okay, that's a good sign.
Yeah.
Maybe he's
That's true.
two-footed. No.
Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. So we need to. It's good news is we've got more players we're linked with. We need to kind of move on to keep in time. So the next one we are rumoured to be very close to signing is someone called Tapsoba, playing for Bayer Leverkusen, and he's a left-footed centre back, about 24 years old, so kind of the prime age to sign one. Powerful, quite quick, good with ball distribution. Deej, you've done some research on this guy, haven't you?
Yes. Edmund Tapsoba is he's actually a right-footed center back, but he plays on the left, and that actually allows for him when he carries the ball forward to. I did a lot of looking into how he passes the ball, 'cause that's like what we're looking for. He plays in a very ball-heavy system at Leverkusen, especially since Xabi Alonso has come in and kind of revitalized that team. I mean, we all kind of got vaguely familiar with Alonso when we were linked with him for like 3 days, but he plays in a ball-heavy system, so that's good for transitioning to Ange's style of play. He also, when he carries the ball, he's very comfortable on the ball. He carries like open, which allows for him to have more of a passing range than some center backs who will kind of have the ball like behind them. I don't know. I'm having a hard time explaining it, but if you watch the game, he's very comfortable on the ball. He makes a lot of passes. He's not great in the air, but that may be because of the position that he plays at Leverkusen more than his actual aerial ability. That's, I guess, the one concern that I'd have about anyone that we bring in, because Romero isn't, I guess, the best in the air either, as we've seen in the past season or two. So
he's flaked out of a few. He's flaked out a bit harsh, but it just feels like Romero. He's not as aggressive in the air as he is on the ground. Like on the ground, he's going in for potential leg breaking lunges, but in the air he kind of seems to softly get beaten off the ball a bit too often. So it would be good to have a commanding centre back there. Do we think that's why we're linked with Mickey van der Ven as well? Is he seems to be more of a commanding, tall, traditional looking centre back with some ball playing ability? Is that a fair assumption for you guys who've researched him?
I think that Van der Ven is he's, from what I've seen of him, he's not as good of a passer as Tapsoba. But I mean, I don't know. I'm sure most people have seen the clip of him going around Twitter. He is that fast. That's not and obviously speed is not the only thing to be looking at, but when you're playing a high line, it's definitely not something that'll hurt. He's I think Van der Ven, based just purely because of his age, he's a bit less polished, which is kind of why I think that Tapsoba would be the slightly better option, just because I'd like someone a bit more polished, especially next to Romero, who's very, very aggressive and could use a calmer head, which is kind of how more of what Tapsoba profiles to me. But obviously Van der Ven is so young, and that he obviously has time to be molded, I guess.
And Toby and Jan, who were two of they were arguably our best centre-back partnership in the last 10 years. They were. They were not commanding in the air either. Like that, they weren't bad in the air, but I wouldn't go into a game thinking, we've got two, absolute monsters in the centre of defence that are gonna. They didn't score lots and lots of goals from corners and things like that either. So it shows it can work. If you're good ball playing defenders, you may concede less set pieces anyway, and find yourself creating more opportunities from the back to outweigh it. anyway, so it matters less.
Tapsoba is 1.94 meters tall, so he's very, very tall. And again, it's literally educate myself on YouTube, so Danny Rose would not be impressed. But when I was watching the bits and pieces of him, is what I was struck by was he's obviously a real unit, a real big lad, but he's again seems really composed and skillful for somebody that size. Really nice balance. Seems to be, again, it's a compilation, right? So they're not going to show the crap, but his positioning in the clips that they had up were really impressive. In 24, like I think Gigi's right about in terms of the partner for Romero, you probably do want someone with a bit more experience. But he's both of those players, Van der Vaart and Tapsoba, both got 5 yellow cards. I'm doing a little bit of a nerdy stat revision last night, and they both got 5 yellows. Now, I mean, I don't think I need to do the research to know that Romero would have been in excess of that, and he picked up at least 1 red, didn't he? Certainly in the Champions League, probably in the Premier League, I can't remember. So, they obviously seem on paper to be a little bit more of a calmer kind of head, but maybe having a 22-year-old alongside Romero would be a little bit more nervy. But again, you just got to trust the manager at the end of the day. I mean, in terms of the price tag, are they fairly similar? The kind of valuation seems fairly similar from what I've seen, around the 30 million euro mark. I don't know.
I think Tapsoba is going to be a bit more expensive. I think he'll end up being closer to 40 or 50.
Really?
Link that was being sent around. Yeah.
Okay.
If that is the case, then he should already be at Hotspur Way. If he's 25 mil, but I highly doubt that.
I do get the impression. Oh, go on, sorry, Stu.
I was going to say I thought I saw a link of him to Liverpool for about 40 million. So.
Yeah, that's true as well. It seems like Liverpool need a new centre back as well.
The thing about Mickey van der Ven, even though he's so tall, I was looking at his stats, and he's particularly poor at heading. One of the worst in percentiles for the league. So that's something, as you said, maybe it's not necessary if you look at Alderweireld and Vertonghen, but it is something maybe that we do have to worry about because we're not great in the air.
Doa, we've got Ben Davies.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, no, it's not looking good, is it? We've got
Royale.
Ben Davies and Eric Dahl and Emerson Royale. We've got and a keeper who apparently can't catch. So that sounds quite flaky to me. I hope that and I'm sure people paid a lot of money to make decisions have looked into that.
It's also Van der Ven. His tackles were also not particularly impressive, statistically speaking. So it's something. Yes, he's quick, but maybe.
So you're saying let Liverpool have him. We'll take Tapsoba.
Yeah, exactly. And to be honest, my preference is for another bloke who's also 194, like the other two, is Scalvini. He's just as good on the ball, progressive, but also actually good in the air and tackling.
Where's he now?
He's at Atalanta.
Okay.
Is he a young player? He's a young kid.
Yeah. What was that, DJ?
I said, are you sure? Are you being fed lines from Fabio?
Well, obviously, I'm the Italian scout on the pod.
Have we had any links to this centre back, or are you just saying you think he'd be a good fit?
I think he'd be a great fit. He's looked at as being like the next Bastoni, the next young Italian, strong, commanding centre back. He's like 20 years old, tall. He comes from Atalanta, which have had quite a good. They have a very good youth setup, as well as scouting setup. So yeah, it's someone I wouldn't mind us looking at and bringing in maybe as kind of the third or fourth option.
Interesting. Okay, so that's goalkeepers to centre backs. With then
one more thing I want to add about Van der Vaart is the one thing to be careful of when looking at aerial duels is Van der Vaart plays primarily in a back three, which can lower the like aerial like duels one, especially because a lot of teams are obviously play with a back four, so you'll have less of I guess an opportunity to win duels in the air when there's.
Should we be worried then that he's more used to playing in a back three as a back two?
I think he's. That's kind of why I am leaning. I don't think it's a worry as long as we don't want him to like start every week, and that's my hang up. I mean, if we get him in time, I think. I mean, everyone else will be learning the new system anyway, so why not add one more? But yeah. If in a perfect world we get him as like and we get both Tapsoba and Van de Ven and allow Van de Ven to flourish.
Just thinking, it is and we were talking about Raya before in the Premier League, Alvin Reddy kind of keeper, but especially with the fact that we know the issues with Romero, if we're going to get to, there is still a strong case to be put towards one of these promising overseas players and somebody from within the Premier League. And I know that you mentioned before the pod about Adebayo, I cannot pronounce it, the Fulham lad.
Tosin.
Tosin, yeah. And there's also the likes of Max Kilman, the Wolves had a great second half of the season there. I mean, I don't know if you have to break the bank, and obviously there's a premium on Premier League players, but when you think of how vital this position is, I suppose then the question is like, who wants to be a backup to Kane if you're going to be bringing in two? Well, one of them isn't going to be starting if Romero's all going to be on, presumably starting each week as well. So it's just an interesting question to be looking at if we are going to be getting two. And if we don't get two, we're a bit bare, aren't we? A bit thin on. Are we looking at Tanganga coming in as cover or whatever? It's interesting.
One injury and then that looks very. But I always assumed the plan was more to sign one marquee centre back, because we play as a two at the back. So let's say it's Tapsoba and Romero. Get Longley. We know Barcelona will eventually buckle. They need the money. Get Longley in for 2 or 3 million quid. There's your backup. And then you've also got Ben Davies who can play there as well. Because Tapsoba's right-footed, maybe he can shift across temporarily into Romero's position.
Tapsoba can play both sides. But perfect. He also does play in a 3 as well. Just thought I'd mention that.
So without Europe as well, we've got to take this into account. It might be that that's feasible. I mean, when Liverpool went on their year where they won the Premier League and the year they won the Champions League, Van Dijk was pretty much the rock to that defence. One injury to him long-term that season and they wouldn't have done it. But you do need a bit of fortune, and I think you need to prioritise one or two competitions, which Liverpool do really well, by the way. I think that's why their squad management is always better now over a season. They normally dump themselves out of 2 competitions to focus on 2. Whereas we go on all 4 fronts, get to January, February, and then we tend to just fall to pieces. So we try and stretch across them. But anyway, that's another discussion.
We're bringing back CCV anyway, so it's fine.
Yeah. Oh, we might bring back Carter Vickers.
Yeah.
I haven't seen any serious tabloid mention it. I seem to be seeing things like, it's called Sport 247, and then everyone going nuts about it, almost like it's smaller papers trying to get an article they know will wind people up and get some traction.
That's never happened before. I don't know what you're talking about.
It never happened, does it? No. Social media is full of no lies at all. It's such a safe place of valid information around the transfer window. But just finishing on the defence, we signed a right back for £40 million because he was Conte's, number one priority. And it's come to light that the £40 million is not an obligation. It's only an option if either club wants to activate it. And is it right that Lisbon was saying they released something which basically highlighted that it was not a permanent contract and that he could technically come back? And that feels like there's a no smoke without fire. Do you guys think that's a sign we might be saying Porro's just not right for the new system? Let's get that £40 million freed up again for someone like James Maddison?
I don't know. I mean, obviously with the way that contracting works these days, they could say that and then somewhere else it could be an obligation. But I think if we assume that it is an option, I do not think that Porro fits very well anywhere in Postecoglou's system. Does that mean that Postecoglou doesn't like him and could carve out a role where he works very well? Obviously not. He very well could. I just think that if we are going based off of the way that he's played at both Celtic and in Japan, which both of their styles look fairly similar, that he will continue with his sort of the 4-3-3 setup with and that would I don't think that would play to Porro's strengths very well.
Interesting. So yeah, it does feel a little bit like I've seen lots of things going, oh, just play him as a right winger. Well, it's like you're kind of square peg round hole, is the old expression, isn't it? It's kind of like,
and it's very different coming from behind as to opposed to already starting up there. I mean, it's completely different positions.
It feels like it sounds like we've got roughly 80 million to spend without raising funds. And that's going to go on to two centre backs and a goalkeeper potentially. So if you can get 40 million, and we've already spent some on Kulusevski, if you can free up 40 million straight away just to get Maddison over the line, who's the creative midfielder, he does seem a very logical fit, even though I'm sure there are probably cheaper options people will be screaming and players worth having a punt on other than him. But he does feel like a relatively safe option to go for that would cure a lot of our ailments at the moment. What do you guys make of Maddison? Do you think he's the right fit? He's homegrown as well, so it's another tick in the box, right?
Yeah, he's 26 years old, so he's coming into his prime. He's got a lot of experience behind him. He's 27 in November. So, there's a lot of really good years ahead of him. His best years should still be ahead of him. And he's been doing it for Leicester for the last couple of seasons. Scored 10 goals in the Premier League last year as well from midfield, which is really impressive. Like 30 appearances, 10 goals. The fact that they've been relegated and there's 1 year left in his contract, like it's a great opportunity. And even though Newcastle are sniffing around as well, it does look like he's from the reports, whether they're factual or not, but the London factor does seem to be mentioned once again, with Tottenham being in our advantage, and I think he'd be a brilliant signing. I mean, he was a player that I really enjoyed watching last season, and that was 6-2 that Sonny hat-trick game, but he scored in that game. He was super in the first half. So for me, it's a no-brainer. We haven't had a player like that since Eriksen. He's a little bit different from Eriksen, but his energy and I think he would suit the Postecoglou way forward, and to have the experience. There's nobody better than that. Like you said before, it's taking a punt on someone, and we've done that so many times before. Like we can't be pissing around with like going in for speculative signings like a Jack Clark and seeing what happens kind of thing. We
need a proven 15 goal a season player like Richarlison is what we need, Jonny.
Well, that's it, exactly, yeah. in fairness, but Richarlison, I don't know, he gets a bit of a bad rap. He didn't have a good first season for sure, but that can change. So his circumstances are a bit different. I think that Maddison is less of a risk, and he's going to be a player who's coming in. Unlike Richarlison, he's going to be starting. You would think starting every week, and it's with the new system. I think it makes absolute sense. And yeah, certainly if the Porro, I didn't realize the Porro, there was an option there. But as much as he is a great player going forward, if that money could be reallocated to getting Maddison, the lion's share of the Maddison deal done, it's a no-brainer. My only question the last thing, thinking about the right back position. So obviously, like, Emerson's gone from this ridiculous scenario where he's getting almost booed by the fans to being like nailed on in the starting 11 next season, and then Spence, because I read a few different things about his time in Rennes, and I know there were issues about how much he played, and then I'm just wondering, because from what I remembered about his time in Forest and Borough before, he's a wing back really. So I'm just wondering about his defensive skills as well. And I guess, I mean, you can coach these things too, but it's just another question mark there. If something happened to Emerson, are we a bit screwed on the right?
Yeah, so anyway, feels like he's. It's if you were in the club's position now, wouldn't it feel very much like the priorities are sign a goalkeeper, get a primary centre back, get a backup centre back, get a creative midfielder, and then all those imperfections of this backup right back's not very good.
Yeah.
Is the left back smooth enough? Like, I think that comes in January and next season. A lot of this, I think, is going to depend. If we get lucky and we can offload Ndombele and a couple of others and Lo Celso, those two alone, that could raise. And even if we are going to sell Højbjerg, which I'm not sure we should yet, I kind of feel like he's the most versatile midfielder we've got right now, and even he gets a lot of unfair stick. And I think he's not the right man for the long term, but maybe for another 12 months, why not just keep him rather than cashing in 30 million quid that doesn't buy you much else? But
the only thing about Højbjerg, I can already see and shouting at him for passing it back. I mean, it's just there, isn't it?
Although he did get better as the season went on. It felt like he tried to develop his game and make these forward parts. But like all those midfielders, I felt so bad for all of them in the same way that they were all bought in for one role and then told to play a very different role. And they were just like, you can imagine being brought into work and being told if you've applied for a sales position and you're a salesman and then being put into HR. You're like, well, this is not what I signed up for. No wonder I'm going to take some time to learn this. I've got no experience doing this job before. So it could just be a case of a bit of patience and that just, again, not being a priority, but it will get sorted out eventually.
Yeah, I mean, if you think, if we have to buy Porro, we've already committed 80 million quid before we even bring in a centre-back in Maddison. I mean,
exactly.
That's 160 million quid. That's a lot of money.
Yeah. But
and we still need another we need a backup to Kulusevski because Gil, I presume, will be back up to Son. I mean, we have a lot of issues in the squad that still need to be addressed.
I think we can probably get away with our forward depth, especially because, I mean, not that he's meant for it. If we do end up getting Maddison can play from the right. I don't think that that's his best position, but then again, I don't think Kulusevski's best position is on the right either. I think Kulusevski's best position would be as an 8, but I guess we're buying Maddison for that, so I guess Kulusevski's staying out wide. But I think that the one thing, just to go back to Spence, the one thing that does give me a little bit more hope for him is that he is at least used to playing in a 4. Because, I mean, and I think a lot of the reasoning behind him getting benched at Rennes wasn't necessarily his fault. It was more that he was brought in to cover for their captain, who had a ridiculous, like an injury and then had a ridiculous recovery rate. Came back way quicker than was expected. And then, I mean, obviously, unless you're like one of the best right backs in the world, which I don't think he is yet, you're not replacing a team's captain. So, yeah.
And talking of players with miraculous recoveries, I heard there was some good news on Bentancur coming up, that he might be ahead of schedule on his return.
Yeah, there was a quotation out yesterday or the day before saying that he's brought the Spurs physio or trainer over to Uruguay and doing double sessions, and apparently he's hoping to get minutes within 3 months, which seems miraculous, really, because we're sort of probably looking at the turn of the year, if we're being realistic, in terms of typical timescales for that injury. So, I mean, that would be, obviously you want to be careful, but clearly he's very, very motivated, and it's fabulous to hear that. Let's hope that trajectory can continue. But
what a boost.
Obviously working really hard. Yeah, absolutely.
To have him and Maddison in the same midfield would be such a different dynamic to having Højbjerg and Skip. And Bissouma back in that. That would be a great midfield 3. It would really it would just be transformative to what we had last season. And then I don't know what this means for Skip, though, which is quite a shame, because I like these academy products and I want them to do well. But if he's just not that type of player again, does he end up going on loan or something? Or do we keep? I assume we've got to keep him for squad depth. For 3 midfielders, you need at least 2 as cover.
Yeah, it's the same thing with Sarr, because I think Sarr looks like an amazing prospect, but he's going to need games.
Yeah.
If you could send him out to another Premier League club at least, and where he's going to be starting most weeks, that would be the ideal, I suppose, wouldn't it?
With a recall option on loan, maybe give Sarr out until January, and if we have an injury, bring him back. Because you'd be a little bit concerned Bentancur gets an injury setback and you're going, oh my gosh, we've got no one in midfield there. I'm at time, but was there any other final comments or topics you guys wanted to bring up? before we
Just
finish?
wanted to throw out there that it looks like we've agreed to personal terms with Maddison.
Yeah, that's
Not
from
that super matters.
one of the ITKs on Twitter who
I
is,
don't
let's
think
say,
personal terms was ever going to be an issue, though.
Yeah.
To be fair, I don't know. We'll
I think
see.
that's a safe guess from that person on Twitter because they
Yeah.
can't be wrong.
Well,
Like,
we
it doesn't
agreed.
matter the person.
We agreed terms with Raya as well. So I mean,
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it doesn't really.
I don't disbelieve that either. That's just going to be how much Leicester feel like they can get from a championship player.
I think 40
Yeah.
million plus incentives is pretty decent.
We'll do an
Offer-
Arsenal 40 million, double it if we win the Champions League next season.
Actually, do you know? I've talked a couple of months ago. We were talking about me losing a substantial bet with my mate Scott, and with his Celtic knowledge and his being gutted at Ange leaving, still starting to recover from that loss. But he said to me the other day, I'm putting it out there now on the airwaves, but he wants to make a bet that, which I'd be happy to take this time, because if I lose, then that means Spurs have done really well. He reckons in 4 years that Tottenham will either win the Champions League or the Premier League. And I'm like, okay, I'll take that. I mean, he knows it's football, and he obviously is. He's not subjective when it comes to Ange, but he doesn't just. He won a few quid off me the last time with Arsenal. Double whammy. Arsenal doing well and me losing money. It was a bad move, but.
And that was interesting, by the way, because we had Scott on as a guest a while back, and he's a professional coach. And he's in the SPL, but he's been tracking Ange for a long time, and he was kind of telling Jolly, who's a mate of Jolly's, that Ange is a very ambitious type. He will have a 3-year plan to win the league. If that sounds silly or not, it's up to you listening, but that will be his ambitions, and which is quite refreshing, isn't it? After we've had 3 managers in a row saying top 4's the target, and say, well, that's the board's objective, that's mine. It would be nice to have a manager who says, I don't give a shit what the board's target is, mine's to win the league, and the rest of you can go to hell. It's exciting.
The only other thing I wanted to mention, which we've not touched on just very briefly, is the Sonny news that came out like within the last week or two. And obviously there was a couple of quotations that he had a surgery a couple of weeks ago, or certainly since the end of the season. And the fact that obviously he's recovering from that and starting to train again, and the quotes about him, he was saying that he was playing through pain for most of the season, and obviously he had an absolute stinker. He got a bit better as the year went on and everything. But I mean, for him to have, I guess, obviously with the golden boot the year before and everything, his commitment to Spurs, the other quotes that are out there when he's been linked with some of these Saudi clubs. And he's, talking about he wants to continue playing the Premier League for several years. He wants to keep playing for Tottenham. Like, he is a hell of a servant. Like, I mean, I think a lot of players would have him down as their favourite Tottenham player. And he's like, his loyalty to the club is incredible, really. And we're really, really lucky to have him. And I really hope that he comes back to something closer to the previous season next year. Because, it does sound like there is mitigating circumstances that, can explain some of his loss of form last year. But it's some guy.
Yeah. Unlike his strike partner, this is the second time that he's come out and shown his loyalty to the club.
Yeah, he deserves a lot of credit for that. He stuck through us. I remember that was the moment when he signed his contract extension. We had that massive downward blip after, towards the end of Poch's era, and Poch had just gone. And all the other players... We had no manager. Kane was walking around golf courses with Gary Neville. It really felt really kind of bleak. We didn't have any vision, and it was kind of a horrible time. And Son just signed a new pen and paper he could have gone easily at that age, at 27, to a massive club and guaranteed some trophies. I'm not saying we're not a big club, but he could have easily gone to a similar size club or bigger and just torn it apart there. But he stuck with us. So, yeah, great guy. I need to end there, guys, but lovely to catch up with you as always. And we'll be back in probably a week's time with hopefully a new centre-back signed and some links to some more interesting players. Up Spurs.
No one's getting done in a week, but up Spurs.